My garden, with its silence and pulses of fragrance that come and go on the airy undulations, affects me like sweet music. Care stops at the gates and gazes at me wistfully through the bars. Alexander Smith. Chen Yun experienced summer in the late 1800s. This was translated by Henry H. Hart. The night creeps in, and every sound of human life is hushed. Even the tinkle of the camel bells comes muted through the dusk. In the faint, dying light of the waning moon, the first hibiscus flower falls. The thought is carried on by the French writer Colette, who wrote, "All of us wince when a rose, falling apart in a tepid room, lets go of one of its shell-like petals and sends it adrift into its own reflection on a smooth marble surface. The sound of its fall, very soft, distinct, is like a syllable of silence, and enough to move a poet." I'm Don Jackson, trying to be silent with the heartbeat of the internet. I'd like to begin with an anecdote about the famed U.S. writer Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was known to occasionally enjoy a companionable silence. From Bartlett's Book of Anecdotes was this: among the sages whom Emerson sought out on his visit to Europe was the notoriously reticent and difficult Thomas Carlyle. He called on Carlyle one evening and was given a pipe while his host took one himself. They sat together, smoking in perfect silence until bedtime, and on parting shook hands most cordially, congratulating each other on the fruitful time they had enjoyed together. End quote. I will always remember something that the great horror actor Vincent Price revealed about his inner nature. He said, "Things don't scare me. Atmospheres do, like darkness and silence." Who would have thought that he would have been afraid of the silence? Silence can generate a very powerful effect in film, especially when used instead of music. Consider the Mel Gibson movie Signs. It would be eerie to stand out in the middle of a field of ripe corn or wheat at night and be startled by the silence. In the film, the only sound at one point, the wind through the tall, swaying stalks, fills the viewer with a certain anxiety, a feeling that you're not alone out there in the moonlight. It had more of an effect on me and the audience than had he used a menacing soundtrack, increasing in intensity. But we shouldn't be afraid of the silence in the night. Barbara Cook, author quoted in the Christian Science Monitor, wrote, "How utterly natural and nourishing silence can be, particularly where there is love. I cannot think of anything less like emptiness than quietly feeling love for another individual, and the joy of seeing someone doesn't always bring the desire to speak." She goes on to write, "Not long ago I opened my eyes in the middle of a moonlit night and saw my husband's profile outlined against the bedroom wall. Not even moving my head from the pillow, I basked in a loving, shared silence that was shaped only by soft breathing. When I finally closed my eyes, I knew completely how substantial was any silence that cradled love." End quote. I remember someone once said, "Words are so weak when love hath been so strong. Let silence speak." There are very few relationships that could survive an entire evening of silence, unless the couple was in the immediate aftermath of an argument. I've also heard of some rare relationships when a long-married couple stops speaking altogether and endures the silence for years. Then I guess it actually becomes toxic and poisons the relationship. In that case, why stay together? I can't imagine living with someone when there is little or nothing to break the silence. When two people become comfortable with each other, There is no need to always fill the empty spaces in a conversation. A companionable silence between friends or lovers actually speaks loudly about the depth of feeling. Agnes de Mille wrote, "No trumpets sound when the important decisions of life are made. Destiny is made known silently." Are you comfortable with silence? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, "Learn to get in touch with silence within yourself and know that everything in this life has a purpose." I thought I would break the silence with some reasons that we need to be quiet at times. Many of us choose meditation as a way to savor the silence. Deepak Chopra from the book Perfect Health, published by Crown, wrote, "Meditation is not a way of making your mind quiet. It's a way of entering into the quiet that's already there, buried under the 50,000 thoughts the average person thinks every day." End quote. Actually, a person can appear to sit in complete silence and yet have a cacophony of voices raging in the brain. We do need to learn how to quiet our noisy brains. Joyce Hiffler in the Rochester, New York Democrat and Chronicle wrote, and I quote, "The sound time makes, little sounds that are imperceptible unless we are as quiet as our own breathing. The ticking of the clock, the cardinal's call, the rivulets of rainfall singing through the drains. We must be very quiet to hear such sounds and other sounds, voices, songs, thoughts. To become still enough to catch the muted sounds will also slow the heartbeat, lower the blood pressure, order the thoughts, and make everything more livable, more workable, and eventually more enjoyable." Are you familiar with the TV series The Listener? The main character, Toby, works as an EMT, but he has been given a gift. He can hear the thoughts of others. We wonder if such a thing is possible. Maybe it needs to start this way. Writer Rachel Snyder wrote a piece called The 7 Words of Well-Being. This is one of them, and I quote, "Sit in silence and see how much there is to hear. Listen to people. What are they really saying? Listen to the very last notes of every song. Listen to your inner voice, the one you hear only when the dim of every day is diminished. Hear the rustle of a leaf, the call of a bullfrog, the pop and crackle of your wood stove. Listen with your toes. Listen with your heart. And always listen to that which is never spoken." End quote. In the series Star Trek The Next Generation, the Betazoid counselor aboard the starship was, in a sense, a mind reader. Her name was Troy. She often made mention of the fact that she could hear each and every mind aboard the space vessel as a dull roar in the background. In her life, it was almost impossible to turn off the voices in her brain. Now, many would have said what a great gift it would be to actually be able to read minds. Well, as that series demonstrated, there would be a downside to the ability. Pico Iyer in Time magazine said, "We have to earn silence, to work for it, to make it not an absence, but a presence, not emptiness, but repletion." Silence is something more than just a pause. It is that enchanted place where space is cleared and time is stayed, and the horizon itself expands. In silence, we often say, we can hear ourselves think. But what is truer to say is that in silence, we can hear ourselves not think, and so sink below ourselves into a place far deeper than mere thought allows. In silence, we might better say, we can hear someone else think. In a writing called The Colors of Friendship, we learn of the argument that all the colors of the rainbow had as they argued over which color was the most powerful. Indigo spoke much more quietly than all the others, but with just as much determination. Think of me. I am the color of silence. You hardly notice me, but without me, you all become superficial. I represent thought and reflection, twilight and deep water. You need me for balance and contrast, for prayer and inner peace. Ivor Noel Hume, an archaeologist, was once quoted as saying, "Peering into the face of a skeleton, an archaeologist cannot help but be aware that he is eyeball to eye socket with someone who knew the answers to many, if not all, of the questions he is asking." For my part, I know that although the bones may be those of a person whose culture rendered him superficially different from me, a cold wind still made him shiver. Liquor fuddled his senses, and in the night a woman's arms made yesterday and tomorrow unimportant. In these and in virtually every other human emotion, we are alike. Our hands touch, but the silence of eternity holds us apart. I like the fact that listen is an anagram of silent. Silence is not something that is there before the music begins and after it stops. It is the essence of the music itself, the vital ingredient that makes it possible for the music to exist at all. Alfred Brendel from the book Musical Thoughts and Afterthoughts. Bernard Holland in Harper's Magazine was quoted as saying, "Silence's most eloquent contradiction is music. Not because music breaks silence with its sounds, but because it interrupts its motion. All the arts do this. Books freeze events between two covers. Pictures pin them against a wall, but music goes viscerally to the source of our mortality. It stops time in its tracks and reinvents it. What a supernatural act it is to command a tempo and rhythm, to set time in motion and bring it to a halt. In a life of temporal endlessness, the musician who makes time start and stop plays at being God. This is music's comfort and its triumph, that somewhere there exists an antidote for decay. Joyce Carol Oates in the New York Times Magazine said, "A musical instrument is a mysterious thing, inhabiting a complex sort of space. It is both a three-dimensional object and a portal to another world. It exists as a physical entity solely so that it, and indeed physicality, can be transcended." I've always liked to listen to late-night AM radio. At night, depending on the weather and conditions of the atmosphere, you can listen to radio stations from all over the U.S. and Canada. Now, I know you can easily listen to just about any radio station in the world today streaming live on the internet, but that takes a little of the romance out of tuning into a distant signal and just listening. Besides, our FM radio and TV signals are traveling to the stars as we speak. Maybe some alien on some distant planet using some kind of audio receiver millenniums to come will be doing the same thing one night as a whole galaxy rises in the nighttime sky of its world. And out of the stellar background noise, an old radio program starts to become clear as the creature carefully tunes the dial. For now, we know that the most complete silence is that which extends between the stars. But I would like to believe that the infinite void of this universe is not as silent as we once believed. That it gives us hope that the universe is a great humming machine, alive with sounds of laughter and tears, softly murmuring whispers and ecstatic shouts, the passionate murmurs uttered during lovemaking, the noise of day-to-day living, the cries of babies being born, and sighs from others dying. Samuel Miller Hagman wrote, "Every sound shall end in silence, but the silence never dies." And Marvin Drake wrote, "If radio's slim fingers can pluck a melody out of the night and toss it over mountains and the sea, If the petal-white notes from a violin are blown across the desert and the city's din, if songs like Crimson Roses are caught from thin blue air, why should mortals wonder if God hears prayers? One final anecdote about the great Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini from Bartlett's Book of Anecdotes. During a rehearsal of Debussy's La Mer, Toscanini found himself unable to describe the effect he hoped to achieve from a particular passage. After a moment's thought, he took a silk handkerchief from his pocket and tossed it high into the air. The orchestra, mesmerized, watched the slow, graceful descent of the silken scarf. Toscanini smiled with satisfaction as it finally settled on the floor. "There," he said, "play it like that." Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.